The courtroom was quiet in the way only serious places ever are. Not peaceful, not calm, just heavy. The kind of silence that makes every small sound feel too loud. A cough echoed from the back row. A chair creaked when someone shifted their weight. Even breathing felt noticeable. People filled the wooden benches, dressed in neat clothes, faces set with expectation. Some were there for work, some for curiosity, and some because they believed today would be important. Papers were stacked neatly on long tables. A judge sat high above everyone else, looking down with tired eyes that had seen too many arguments over the years. Near the front of the room stood a small girl. She was only 8 years old. Her feet barely touched the floor as she stood straight, hands folded together the way she had been taught. Her shoes were clean but worn. Her clothes were simple, nothing fancy, nothing that stood out. Her hair was pulled back carefully, not stylish, just practical. She looked calm, but inside, her heart beat fast. Most people in the room barely noticed her at first. When they did, confusion crossed their faces. A child did not belong here. This was a place for adults, for rules, for sharp words and long arguments. Not for someone who still needed help reaching a sink. A few people whispered to each other, "Why is a child here?" One voice murmured, "Is this some kind of joke?" Another said quietly. The girl did not look around. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on a spot just below the judge's seat. She had been told where to stand and what to do. She followed rules well. She always had. Behind her stood the one adult she trusted most. The person's hand hovered close, not touching, but ready, a quiet promise without words. The case had already gone on for hours. Lawyers spoke with confidence, using words that felt too big for the room. They talked about facts, records, expert opinions. They spoke like they always did, fast and firm, sure that logic alone would decide everything. Music had been mentioned many times, but not in a joyful way. It was discussed like a problem, like a broken thing that needed to be explained away. One side insisted that a certain piano piece was impossible to perform correctly. They called it a failure, a mistake from long ago that should never have been taken seriously. Experts had agreed. Grown men and women with years of training stood earlier and spoke with confidence. They explained why the piece could not be played the way it was written. They used diagrams, numbers, and history. They spoke about fingers, timing, and limits. They said no human could do it as intended. The judge listened carefully. Notes were taken. Heads nodded. The other side had little to argue back with. They did not deny the difficulty. They did not deny the past failures. Instead, they asked for something unusual. They asked for a demonstration. At first, the request sounded almost disrespectful. A piano in a courtroom, music instead of words. A few people even smiled. Sure, it would change nothing. Then they added one more detail. The demonstration would be done by the child, standing at the front. That was when the room truly noticed her. Eyebrows lifted, mouths tightened. Someone let out a short laugh before stopping themselves. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, trying to understand what was being suggested. "A child?" the judge asked. The voice was not unkind, but it carried doubt. The adult beside the girl spoke calmly, not loudly, not dramatically, just steady. The girl had practiced for moments like this, they said. She understood the piece in a way others did not. She did not need long explanations or special treatment. She only needed a chance. The judge looked down again at the girl. She did not smile. She did not look scared either. She simply waited. The judge had seen many tricks over the years. Big promises that led to nothing. Emotional appeals meant to distract from weak cases. This felt close to that line. Still, the law allowed demonstrations, and something about the quiet confidence in the room gave pause. After a long moment, the judge sighed. "Very well," came the answer, briefly. A piano had already been moved into the courtroom earlier that morning. Most people assumed it was for decoration or some odd request that would never be approved. It sat to the side, polished and silent, its black surface reflecting the overhead lights. The girl turned toward it. Each step she took sounded loud against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. I followed her. She climbed onto the bench with care, adjusting herself the way she had done many times before. Her feet dangled freely now. She placed her hands in her lap and took a small breath. The room leaned in without realizing it. Some people felt uncomfortable. Watching a child prepare to fail was not entertainment. Others felt certain this would end quickly and awkwardly. No one expected anything impressive. The piano piece in question had defeated professionals. It required speed, control, and understanding far beyond normal training. It was long, complex, and unforgiving. Those who tried it either stopped halfway or finished with obvious mistakes. That history weighed on the room. The girl knew this. She had heard the stories. She had read the notes. She understood why adults struggled with it. But she also understood something else. She placed her fingers on the keys. They were small fingers, light and steady. They did not shake. The judge raised a hand, ready to stop the demonstration if it became pointless. Lawyers prepared polite smiles. The audience held their breath, not from hope, but from habit. No one noticed the way the girl's eyes softened, as if she was no longer in the courtroom at all. For her, the room faded. There was only the piano, and the silence just before sound. That silence stretched for a second longer than expected. Then the first note was about to come. No one yet understood that everything they believed was about to be questioned, not because of force, not because of argument, but because of a child, a piano, and a moment that would not last long. And that was how part one ended, not with music, but with the world holding its breath. The moment stretched on after the girl placed her fingers on the keys. No sound came yet, just waiting. The kind of waiting that makes people shift in their seats and wonder how long is too long. The judge cleared their throats softly. A lawyer glanced at the clock on the wall. Someone in the back crossed their arms. The piano had not made a single sound, but already it felt like it was speaking. The girl took another small breath. She did not rush. She had learned long ago that rushing only made things harder around her. The courtroom stayed tense. The adults were ready for a mistake, for a wrong note, for proof that this moment never should have been allowed. Behind her, the adult she trusted watched closely, not with fear, but with belief, the kind that does not need words. The piano piece had been discussed again while she waited. A lawyer stood and repeated what everyone already knew. The piece was written decades ago by someone who pushed limits too far. It demanded speed beyond normal hands and timing that left no room for error. Performers had tried and failed, again and again. This is not a performance issue, the lawyer said. It is a design flaw. Several heads nodded. The lawyer went on to explain how the notes stacked on each other in impossible ways, how the human brain could not process them fast enough, how even modern training had not solved the problem. The piano, they argued, was proof of nothing. A child playing it would only prove the same old truth. The girl listened without turning around. She had heard these arguments before, many times, in classrooms, in small halls, in rooms where adults talked over her as if she were not there. She learned early to listen quietly. Adults often revealed more than they meant to. When the lawyer finally sat down, the room grew quiet again. The judge looked toward the girl. "You may begin when ready." The words echoed in her mind. When ready. She was ready long before she walked into this room. Her fingers lowered slightly, not pressing yet, just resting, feeling the keys. Each one felt familiar, like old friends lined up in order. Her story with the piano had not started with lessons or rules. There were no framed certificates on walls, no expensive teachers praising her talent. There was only curiosity. As a much younger child, she noticed patterns and sound the way others noticed colors or shapes. Music made sense to her before words did. When she heard something once, it stayed with her. Not just the sound, but the structure behind it. She did not think of music as long or short, easy or hard. She thought of it as complete or incomplete. The failed piece was incomplete in the minds of adults. To her, it was simply misunderstood. She had studied it quietly, without pressure, not trying to master it the usual way, not trying to force her hands to obey impossible instructions. Instead, she listened. She broke it apart in her head. She saw how the notes related to each other, how time bent around them. While others tried to play every note exactly as written, she asked a different question. What was the piece trying to say? That question changed everything. In the courtroom, none of this was visible. All they saw was a small child sitting at a large piano, feet dangling, eyes calm. Someone whispered, "She looks too young." Another voice replied, "This won't take long." The girl pressed her fingers down. The first sound rang out clear and sharp. It was not loud. It was not dramatic, just precise. A few people straightened in their seats. Then came the second sound, and the third. The notes did not follow the pattern most expected. They moved quickly, but not wildly. There was control in every touch, purpose. Then, almost as soon as it began, it stopped. 3 seconds. That was all. For a heartbeat. No one reacted. Some thought she had made a mistake. Others thought she had given up. A few assumed she forgot what came next. A lawyer stood halfway out of their chair, ready to object. But then something strange happened. The sound lingered. Not physically, but in the minds of everyone in the room, the notes connected in a way that felt finished, complete. Like a sentence that ended exactly where it should. A music expert in the audience frowned, then slowly sat back down. "That's not possible," someone whispered. The judge did not speak. The girl lifted her hands from the keys and rested them in her lap. She did not smile. She did not look around for approval. She simply waited. The courtroom erupted in quiet confusion. "That was too short," one lawyer said. "She didn't play the whole piece," another added. "But," a different voice said softly, unsure how to finish the thought. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Explain," the judge said, looking not at the girl, but at the experts who had spoken earlier. They exchanged looks. No one answered right away. One expert stood slowly. They looked shaken, as if something solid beneath them had shifted. "She didn't skip the piece," the expert said carefully. "She resolved it." The word hung in the air. "Resolved." Another expert joined in, pointing to notes on a page. They explained how the girl had condensed repeating patterns into a single expression, how she captured the full structure in seconds without losing meaning. "She didn't rush," they said. "She understood." Murmurs spread through the room. The lawyer who had argued impossibility looked stunned. "But the written notes," they began, "are instructions," the expert replied. "Not the only truth." The judge leaned back, eyes fixed on the piano. The girl remained still. She had done what she came to do. What the adults decided next was no longer in her control. But something had already changed. The piece that had been called a failure was no longer broken, and the child everyone doubted was no longer invisible. The courtroom would never hear that piano the same way again. And this was only the beginning. The silence after the last note felt different from before. It was no longer heavy. It was alert, like a room that had just woken up. People shifted again, but now with purpose. Pens moved, papers were lifted, eyes stayed fixed on the piano and the small girl sitting there. The judge broke the silence. "We will take a moment," they said, voice steady but changed. "I want clarity." The girl nodded once, the way she did when listening. She slid off the bench carefully and stood beside the piano. Her hands rested at her sides. She looked smaller standing than she did while playing. The judge turned to the experts. "I want this explained in plain words." Plain words were not what the experts were used to. They spoke in terms of theory and tradition. But now, they tried. One expert stepped forward. "The piece repeats itself," they said. "Not in sound, but in structure. Most players try to perform every written moment." She identified the pattern underneath. Another added, "It's like reading a long sentence and understanding it so well that you can say it in one breath, without losing meaning." Murmurs spread again. Some people nodded slowly. Others still looked unsure. A lawyer stood. "So she changed the piece?" "No," the expert replied. "She completed it." That word again. Completed. The girl listened quietly. This part always felt strange to her. Adults explaining something she felt rather than calculated. But she understood why they needed to. The judge looked at her. "Did anyone teach you to do that?" She shook her head. "No." Her voice was soft but clear. "How did you know?" the judge asked. She thought for a moment. Adults often asked questions, expecting big answers. She searched for a simple one. "It felt finished," she said. A pause followed. The judge nodded slowly. The lawyer who argued against the demonstration stood again, clearly unsettled. "Feeling is not proof," they said. "This court relies on facts." The judge did not disagree. "And facts are being discussed." The adult who stood behind the girl finally spoke again, calm, careful. "The fact is the piece was labeled impossible. The fact is it was just performed in a way experts agree is valid." The room buzzed with quiet agreement and disagreement all at once. The judge ordered a short break. People stood, whispering more openly now. Some hurried toward the experts, asking questions. Others stepped back, trying to process what they had just seen. The girl stayed where she was. The adult beside her crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "You did well," they said softly. She nodded. Praise was not new, but it still felt strange. She looked at the piano again. To her, it was just an instrument. It had done what it was supposed to do. Across the room, two experts spoke quietly but urgently. "If this holds," one said, "it changes how we teach structure. It changes how we define mastery." The other replied. When the court resumed, the air felt sharper. The judge called everyone back to order. "We will continue." More questions followed. About timing, about interpretation, about whether this could be repeated. "Can you do it again?" the judge asked. The girl looked at the piano. "Yes." She climbed back onto the bench. This time, there was no doubt in the room, only attention. She placed her fingers on the keys again. The same 3 seconds passed. The same clean sound. The same sense of closure. No objections followed. The judge exhaled. One lawyer tried one last angle. Could this be chance? An expert answered before the judge could. Chance doesn't repeat itself that way. The judge nodded. The girl stepped down once more. Now eyes followed her, not with doubt, but with something closer to respect. The judge addressed the room. This court recognizes demonstrated understanding as evidence. The words landed with weight. The case began to turn. Arguments that once sounded strong now felt thin. Claims of impossibility lost their power. What mattered was no longer what adults believed could not be done, but what had clearly been done. The girl did not understand all the legal details. She did not need to. She watched faces instead. The way shoulders dropped. The way voices softened. One person in the audience wiped their eyes. Another smiled without realizing it. The piano sat quietly, lid open, no longer just a prop. As the judge spoke again, the girl felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not excitement. Relief. She had worried that adults would not listen, that they would decide before seeing. That fear was gone now. The judge looked at her one more time. You may step back, she did. As she stood beside the adult who had believed in her, she felt taller somehow, not in body, but in presence. The courtroom had changed. It was no longer a place where she didn't belong. It was a place that had hurt her. And outside those walls, she did not yet know it, but something larger had already begun to move. People would talk. They would question old rules. They would argue and study and debate. All because a child chose to listen instead of force. And because 3 seconds were enough. The courtroom did not return to normal after what happened. Even as the case moved forward, the feeling in the room stayed different. Lighter, but also deeper. Like everyone knew they had just witnessed something that could not be undone. The judge asked for more discussion, but the tone had shifted. No one spoke with full confidence anymore. Each word was chosen carefully now. The experts were called again, one by one. They explained the piano piece from different angles. Some spoke about structure, others spoke about timing. One spoke about how the human mind processes patterns. They all came back to the same point. The piece was never truly broken. It had only been approached the wrong way. The girl stood quietly near the front, listening. She did not feel proud or important. She felt tired. Concentration always did that to her. Her small hands rested against her legs, fingers gently curled as if still touching invisible keys. The adult beside her noticed and offered a quiet smile. Almost done, they whispered. She nodded. Across the room, a lawyer spoke with less force than before. If this understanding is accepted, they said, then past judgments about this piece must be reconsidered. That is not a legal issue. Another lawyer replied. That is an academic one. The judge watched the exchange closely. Today, it is both. Those words carried weight. The discussion moved beyond music now. It touched on how ability is measured, on how rules are written, on how often children are dismissed simply because they are young. The judge addressed the room. This court must decide based on evidence, not tradition. Several people in the audience nodded. The girl looked around then, really looked. She noticed faces she had not seen before. Some were soft with curiosity. Some were thoughtful. Some looked unsettled. She wondered why adults found this so difficult. To her, listening had always come first. Another expert spoke. What she did cannot be taught easily, they said. It comes from perception. Then how do we measure it? A lawyer asked. The expert paused. By allowing it to exist. That answer seemed to settle something in the room. The judge called for written records to be entered. Diagrams were displayed. Notes from the girl's demonstration were added to the case file. The piano piece was no longer just words on paper. It was evidence. The girl felt a strange sense of distance as this happened. She understood she was important to the moment, but she did not feel ownership over it. The music did not belong to her. It never had. It belonged to anyone willing to hear it differently. A short recess was called. Outside the courtroom doors, people spoke more freely. Voices rose. Hands moved as people explained what they had seen. Did you hear how clean it was? One person said. It felt complete. Another replied. I don't even play music, but I felt it. Someone else added. The girl sat on a bench in the hallway, swinging her feet gently. She watched people walk past, none of them noticing her now. That felt normal again. The adult beside her offered her a small bottle of water. She drank slowly. Are you okay? They asked. Yes, she said. just quiet inside. They understood. When the court resumed, the judge looked more certain than before. "We will proceed to conclusion," they announced. Arguments that once took hours now took minutes. Points were summarized. Claims were weighed against what everyone had witnessed. The side that relied on impossibility had little left to stand on. The girl watched as one lawyer sighed and sat back down. Not angry, just accepting. The judge spoke again, outlining how the demonstration changed the court's understanding of the issue, how real-world proof mattered more than long-held belief. The girl did not understand every word, but she understood the tone. Something was being corrected. The judge paused before continuing. Their eyes moved briefly to the girl. "This court acknowledges that extraordinary understanding can exist regardless of age," they said. A ripple moved through the room. The girl felt warmth rise in her chest. Not excitement. Something steadier. Validation. The judge continued, explaining how the case would be resolved based on this new understanding. How the decision would reflect not just the law, but fairness. The adult beside the girl placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The room listened. As the ruling unfolded, the piano remained silent, but its presence was strong. It had already spoken. The judge's final words came calmly. "The demonstration presented today stands as credible and transformative evidence." That was enough. The girl exhaled slowly. Around her, reactions varied. Some people smiled openly. Others sat quietly, thinking. A few wiped their eyes, surprised by their own emotions. The court was adjourned. People stood, gathering papers, still talking softly. The formal tension was gone. The girl stepped away from the piano one last time. She did not touch it again. There was no need. As she walked toward the exit, someone stopped the adult beside her. "That child changed something today," they said. The adult looked down at her and smiled. She listened outside. The air felt different, fresher. The girl squinted slightly at the light. The world felt the same and not the same at all. She did not know what would happen next. She did not think about headlines or attention. She thought about going home, about quiet, about sound. Inside her mind, the peace rested, complete and peaceful. The courtroom doors closed behind her. But what happened inside would not stay there. The hallway outside the courtroom slowly emptied. Voices faded. Footsteps moved farther away. What had felt crowded only minutes ago now felt wide and quiet. The girl walked beside the adult who had been with her all day. Their steps matched without trying. Neither spoke right away. Some moments felt better left untouched. Outside the building, the air was cool. Not cold, just enough to make breathing feel clear. The girl took a deep breath without thinking about it. She looked up at the tall walls behind her. From the outside, the building looked ordinary, solid, serious. It gave no sign of what had just happened inside. She wondered how many other moments like today had been hidden behind walls like these. A few people stood nearby, talking quietly. When they noticed the girl, they stopped. One person smiled. Another nodded with respect. No one rushed toward her. No one asked questions. That felt right. They walked toward the car and got inside. The door closed with a soft click. The world outside became distant. "You okay?" the adult asked gently. "Yes," the girl said. She rested her head back against the seat. "It's quiet now." The adult understood what she meant. The drive home passed without much conversation. Buildings gave way to smaller streets. Noise softened. The girl watched the sky through the window. Clouds moved slowly, not caring about courtrooms or music. At home, everything felt familiar. Shoes by the door. A small rug slightly out of place. The smell of something warm from earlier in the day. The girl went to her room and sat on the floor. She lined up a few small objects the way she liked them. Straight, balanced. The piano was in the other room. She did not go to it right away. Later that evening, the adult turned on the news. The sound was low, but the girl heard enough. There was an unusual moment in court today. The voice said. The adult turned it off. "Do you want to hear it?" they asked. The girl shook her head. "Not now." That was fine. The next few days passed slowly and quickly at the same time. Messages came. Emails, requests. Some people wanted interviews. Others wanted explanations. The adult said no to most of them. "She's still a child," they said. The girl spent her time as she always had, reading, listening, thinking, sometimes playing, sometimes sitting in silence. When she returned to the piano, it was late one evening. The house was quiet. She lifted the lid and touched the keys lightly. She did not play the piece from the courtroom. She played something else. Something simple. Something unfinished elsewhere. The effects of that day continued. Experts talked. Teachers debated. Old notes were pulled out and studied again. People who had dismissed the piece for years now listened with new ears. Some resisted the idea. Change was uncomfortable. Others welcomed it. They spoke about how rules were made, about how often systems ignored different kinds of understanding, about how many voices had been quieted before they could be heard. The girl was not part of those discussions. She did not need to be. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It was official, careful, full of words about decisions and outcomes. The adult read it slowly, then smiled. "It's done," they said. The girl looked up. Okay, that was all she needed to know. One afternoon, the adult asked her a question. "Do you know why what you did mattered?" The girl thought for a long time. "Because they listened?" she said finally. The adult nodded. Double quotes, "Yes," they said. "And because you showed them how." The girl accepted that quietly. At school, things were mostly the same. A few people looked at her differently. Some asked questions she didn't know how to answer. "Are you a genius?" one asked. She shrugged. "I just listen." That answer confused some people. Others understood. The piano piece was no longer called a failure in certain circles. It was called complex, open, misunderstood. That mattered. One evening, the girl sat again at the piano. The house was quiet. The lights were low. She placed her fingers on the keys. She thought about the courtroom, about the silence before sound, about the way the room had changed. She pressed a key. The sound filled the room. Not 3 seconds this time. Longer. Gentle. The music was not for proof, not for courts or experts or rules. It was just music. And that was enough. Far away, people would continue to talk about that day. They would argue about meaning and method. They would write and teach and debate. But the girl would keep doing what she had always done. Listening. Understanding. Finding completion where others saw only failure. And somewhere between the silence and the sound, her life would continue. Not louder than before, just clearer.